Hello everyone, here is a little bit of feedback for you from Assessment 2 Early Ideas. It's really important for you to consider this feedback as you're starting to develop your work for Assessment 3. So what we're going to talk about is what was really successful about Assessment 2, what was less successful, and what will I do now with this feedback. So first of all, what was successful? So what the tutors and I felt was quite successful was your form making, and there were really diverse expressions of form, some more quiet, some very overt or loud, some that used volumes, some that used planes, some that implied space. The common theme in the success of forms was that you responded to one or to several aspects of the brief to start to generate your spatial response. So some people really explored natural light and the way that natural light would affect the experience of the interior spaces. And I think the two examples here did this. Other people really looked at spaces and forms that might respond to Ushio and Noriko, to their personalities, to the type of space that they might like to inhabit. Others looked at the compositional aspects of the site and the history of the site. The more successful forms started to link in idea or spatial expression the form of the interior to the exterior to the urban intervention on the sidewalk, and you can start to see this in the example on the middle. We were also really pleased to see forms that were quite iterative, so you could see a clear progression in one form from one week to the development of the exterior form in the next week to the development of the urban interior the week following, sometimes with several examples, and you can see this on the image on the right with the black and the box board. The second component that we felt was very successful was your crafting, and so this relates to the visual communications aspect of the assessment criteria. We felt that both the two-dimensional drawings and the three-dimensional models were very well made. They were also very clear in their representation both of the existing site and of your spatial propositions. What made them particularly successful also was that there was a clear relationship between what we were seeing in the two-dimensional drawings and what we were looking at in the three-dimensional models, and that the two-dimensional drawings served to offer us some information and the three-dimensional models offered us different information. So as you're moving forward, think about the role that two-dimensional and three-dimensional works play in starting to tell the story of your idea and your space. The last component we felt you did very well was engagement. And this is engagement in the tasks on assessment day, but also engagement from weeks 1 to 4 in all of the in-class exercises and the out-of-class tasks. We felt that you were very committed to discussion also between your peers and with your tutors, and we've seen that developing as the weeks have gone on. It's very important to be able to discuss as a way to start to form an opinion, and looking at one another's work can be a way to inform your own stance as a designer. This is something that we are very interested in starting to develop over the years of the interior architecture program within each of you. So what was less successful? Although we felt that you were very engaged in discussion and quite critical discussion, we often didn't see that or hear that coming through in your presentations in Assessment 2. So what we want you to do is to think quite reflectively and critically about why you are doing what you are doing as you engage in each of the tasks throughout this course. So what does that mean? So in this, it's very important to reflect, as we've just said, on the reasoning behind your spatial decisions. And this can come before making or drawing. or it can come after or through making or drawing. If we have a look at an example of before, it coming before making, let's imagine that we're looking at the personalities of Ushio and Noriko, and we'd really like to make a space for Noriko to escape the ramblings of Ushio, right? And I'm thinking I'd like to make a space of escape, a space of transcendence. So I'm going to offer Noriko a view up to the trees on the site, and in a manner that almost reflects kind of religious architecture, I'm going to make a small pinhole at the top of the space to allow light to come in. So what I've done here is I've started to look at an idea and imagine how I might express that idea spatially. Idea before spatial proposition. We can also flip that around, and that's what we've been kind of throwing at you as an example of design methodologies in the first 4 weeks of the course. So let's imagine that I've made first. I've looked at a model of the existing site and I've built something in response to that site. So I'm going to look at the model and think, well, what have I instinctively done here? I've responded, let's say, to the stepped form of the existing site. So I'm relating to the geometries, the formal geometries of the existing building in my proposition. If I look a little bit deeper at that, could that also be a way of connecting to Ushio and Noriko and saying, I'm going to offer, again, if we look at Noriko, a space that starts off quite tall and open and then steps inwards and then steps inwards again, so that in the middle of my micro apartment, I have a very quiet or intimate space for Noriko. And maybe the bigger, broader spaces is where Noriko and Ushio share particular experiences or functions. So here I've flipped it. I have made first, and then I've started to analyze what that making could mean, how it could start to drive further design ideas. So what I have just done there is started to make connections between the research and the making that I've done in response to the site, as well as the research and the making that I've done in response to Ushio and Noriko, the end users. And that's what we'd like you to think a little bit more proactively about in Assessment 3. What are the connections between your research, your drawing, your making, and what are the hierarchies? So what is really important in terms of forming a design idea? And what maybe is less important, and it'll start to sit on the periphery. You can analyze your work now. Take half an hour to start to connect the dots and to form hierarchies. So if we continue talking about design ideas, what we would like you to think about in Assessment 3 is telling us about what we cannot see on the wall. So what does this mean? I guess what we can see on the wall is often your physical spatial expression, and we'll start to get into light and materiality as the weeks go on. And we'll get a little inkling of what your design idea is through diagrams and through your design statement. Think about telling us why you made these spatial decisions, where that design idea came from. What really struck a chord with you about the project? What was really important? What did you intend a particular space to feel like that maybe isn't communicated in your drawings or models? What we want you to think a little bit more strategically about is leveraging the speaking time that you're given to tell us a little bit more of the narrative of your project rather than repeating the information that we can see quite explicitly on the wall. The other thing, and we talked about this a little bit in the lecture, is we'd like you to fine-tune your accuracy in terms of representing the site. So the general site was very well done, and we don't want you to get too caught in the nitty-gritty of, millimeters, but there are several areas to consider. The width of the site and being accurate about that, so looking at your model, and making sure that you're representing only one side of the semi-detached terrace, not both sides. The slopes of the roofs, so which roofs slope in which direction and how steep are they. The trees, so the height of the trees, they were often shown as quite small, and also the width of the canopy, they were often quite tight, and also the width of the footpath. So this is all generally there in the model, but you'll see, and what we noticed is that when you start to manipulate that model, sometimes things have changed. So what you need to do is return to site. You need to look at the at the Maps apps that we have linked you to in Moodle, and you can start to reflect on the drawings that you're creating in terms of their accuracy of representing the site. It's really important that you practice your skills in observing and representing sites, because this is what we do as interior architects in the built environment. We work with existing conditions, and we can design in a more sensitive manner to them when we understand them in great detail. And then finally, project accuracy. So we weren't too concerned about that in the first few weeks, but moving on towards assessment 3, we'd like you to reread the course outline and understand what the parameters and limitations of the project are. The big ones that I could see were adherence to the kind of rules, let's say, around the maximum height, which is the top of the party wall, and the maximum length, which is the rear eastern facing facade. So you can't go beyond those two edges, let's say. In the course outline, you'll see these diagrams here, which outline some of the parameters of the project. And this is something or a methodology that you will start to become familiar with as you work through the program of interior architecture, but also as you graduate. So we're always working with limitations that may come from a client. It may come from a council, it may come from an existing building, and it's important to understand those limitations so that you can bounce off them in your design propositions. So, what do you do now? I think it's really important to take 10 or 15 minutes just to critically reflect on this feedback in light of what you have done and what you're doing now. So often what I do is keep a journal, and I'll write down a few points. Okay, so I've developed this and I've tested it now and I have this feedback. What would I do differently? What will I do differently? What do I really need to focus on? What is less important? How do I allocate my time? It's worth jotting down a few points around this and keeping these things at the front of your mind as you develop assessment 3. Because this feedback relates directly to the assessment criteria that we'll be examining in your work as you present in 2 weeks. Best of luck and see you all this week. Thank you.